In this lesson, we're going to embed a camera into our application. The first thing we need to do is to look at the Android manifest. Now, we really haven't talked about this before, but one of the things the manifest provides us is telling the device that we need permissions to certain hardware aspects. In this case, we need permissions to use the device's camera. There are a number of other permissions involved in here. For instance, in the future, we'll be taking a look at recording audio. Our application is fairly simple. We have a button to actually take a picture. We have an object called a surface view, which I'll talk about in just a second. And then we have the image of the picture that we've taken. The surface view is essentially the camera's preview. A surface view is an interesting object, and we're going to look at that a lot more when we get into graphics. But for our purposes right now, you can think of it as basically a canvas, a drawing canvas within our application. And the camera is just going to use that canvas. In the code, we implement a whole lot of interfaces. Most of them are camera callback interfaces, and then there's a surface holder callback. So we'll talk a bit about those as we get to them. We have our camera object, which is an Android hardware camera. And then this is just what we're going to save our picture to. The first thing we work with is the surface view. And there's an object called a holder, which is essentially the instance of the surface view and the canvas within it. And we add a callback, and that relates to this holder callback interface. And that callback is important to us to determine when the surface is created, or is it changed, or when it's destroyed. We set a couple of other parameters on the surface, which we'll get to when we talk about graphics. And finally, we have our button to take a picture. So, when the surface is created, we open up our camera, and we get its parameters and start setting the parameters. So we set the autofocus callback and the preview callback, its lock, and the preview display. The setting the preview display is why we need the surface, because the preview display is going to be using the holder, which is an object on the surface. This is not available right at create of the activity. You have to wait until the surface is actually created. So that's why we have this surface created callback and why we needed to implement this interface. Now that all that's set up, we can start the preview. Now these parameters we can use, and we can set a lot of parameters on the camera, but at this point we just want to get into the basics of it. So right now in the code we've got the camera in preview mode. So when they click on the button to take the picture, all we do is call the take picture method on it. And that's an asynchronous method, so there's going to be a callback called on picture taken. And that will give us the information as to what file the picture was stored under. So we create a file stream for that, and the bitmap, and decode the file, and set the image view's bitmap to that. This ought to look somewhat familiar in that we've done this sort of thing before. And then we start the camera into preview again, otherwise it would just hold the picture that was taken. There are some more overrides that have to be implemented for the interfaces that we've chosen. The surface changed override would tell you if anything was resized or the orientation changed. The surface destroyed method is called when the surface goes away, and at that point we need to shut the camera down. And then these are some of the overrides for the camera interface. So let's see what that looks like within the application. And as you can see, we still have the emulator camera with its fine checkerboard. And when I take that picture, our image view gets the picture that we took. And we go in back to preview, and I can take another one, and there you go. So that's how to embed a camera into an application.